Welcome back to Discover the Difference. My name is Gabe Earl, and I'm here with my co-host, Jamie Reed. We're lucky today to have an incredible visionary on our podcast, Nancy Gale. Nancy started her company, Jamah, which is an American luxury bag company, along with her nonprofit ambitions to help support disadvantaged youths. We're going to learn about how those two are intertwined and how successful she's been with both of those endeavors. So please stay tuned and hear what Nancy Gale has to say.
But something you said when we were talking as we sat down here about your experience moving from California to Detroit at the age of 7 made me think, I don't know if it resonated, Gabe, but of an entrepreneurial mindset from a 7-year-old kid challenging your parents. I don't want to move to Detroit. Just leave me here with some food, some money, so I can pay my mortgage and rent. I mean, that's somebody, if you're going to bookmark a 7-year-old of being a visionary and creating their own lane and companies, that's it. From 7 years old, you already had it.
I think so. And, I used to, when I was growing up, in hindsight, I realized I used to have so many conversations with people that would tell me things I thought of, or funny enough that I did and they didn't even know I had done, were impossible. And so as I got older, when I started to think, the word entrepreneur, right, became just, it's ubiquitous, right? It's just everywhere, everything. And I kept thinking, like, and then the idea that you could get now a degree in entrepreneurship and teach entrepreneurship. What I realized is being an entrepreneur, right, is being a visionary. And what's a visionary is really someone who sees something that doesn't exist. And I started to realize, like, I see things that don't exist, good or bad, right or wrong, like whether they're great ideas or bad ideas. And so I started to realize a lot of the naysaying I got is if someone can't see something that doesn't exist for themselves, they certainly can't imagine someone else doing it. And so even when we started Ambition, I realized we can't teach someone to be an entrepreneur. I think that's really sort of part of you. But what we can teach is how entrepreneurs think. And if we do that, a lot of people that really are entrepreneurs will discover that.
Well, there was a Gary Vaynerchuk talk I was listening to. The question was around conformity and grades. Like, do I beat my kid up for getting a B- in math? And he said, look, your kids are going to be what you set values around. So if you set values around that B has to be an A, then they're going to learn how to conform to education and they're going to learn how to get A's. And he said his experience was that he didn't have things. And so if he wanted to buy something, he had to set up a lemonade stand, or he did this, or he did that. And that experience is what gave him the entrepreneurial spirit. Were there moments like that in your life where if you wanted something, you had to do it? Or how did you figure out how to just go create things?
So, yeah, I remember when I was probably 10 and I had a friend, we had a sleepover, and I decided I wanted to open a restaurant, like a full-on restaurant. And because I had the great fortune of 2 folks who would say, the world is your oyster. You can do anything if you want to do the work to do it. Now, of course, when they woke up the next morning and I had pages and pages of what this restaurant would look like, they did have to say, like, we don't know, like how we'll do this. But I remember even then they didn't want to say, no, you can't. And so I think I looked at the world just like, if you want something, you go after it. And I had a mom and a dad that did that, whether, again, it resulted in successes. And I think what I realized, too, is what's the real definition of success? It's easy to think it's all dollars, but it's much bigger than that. And so, I think the idea that you just, when you see something you want, you figure out a way to get that. Because all of the things that are huge, right? Like, we think there'll never be another big house. There'll never be another, after Microsoft, a company like that. There'll never be another Amazon. Well, there will be, because if someone thought of something that didn't exist, there will be more and more of that. It's just the people who have the idea, right, but also understand the work it takes to make those things
You mentioned
happen.
the naysayers along the way,
Yeah.
where you were, you overcame that,
Yeah.
where they didn't think it was possible and you did it.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of that? And
Oh my
maybe from
God.
your youth or
All the way, one of the biggest ones that relates to my business, though, is I was in the car with a friend. I think my company, Jamah, was probably 5, 6 years old at the time. And I said, I've really defined what this is going to look like. And I want Jamah to be known as the first true American luxury handbag brand. Like, we will be one of the big houses. And she said, "We're not going to be any more big houses. That's not going to happen." And I said, "And I want to be known as the first one in the USA, like real luxury with real traction."
You're the pioneer.
Yes. And I just remember her look. And I said, "Firstly, you really think we're at the end of that? Like, there won't be new businesses that become huge?" And I said, "And I'm really patient. Like, the one thing I always knew is anything you do right really well takes a long time." And and that's counter to the sort of technology fast. But if you look at our big like institutions, they've been around forever. And if you look in the fashion industry, like Chanel and Louis, and like Chanel started in 1914. It was the 50s when people really universally knew who Chanel was. That's a lot of years.
like 40.
Yes. But
That's good math, Gabe.
right, wow.
Way to go.
I was doing that for everybody's.
In case we have any challenged viewers.
But we forget that, right? We're so used to things moving quickly. And to me, that didn't matter. Like, I knew that if I stuck with it, I would hit that point that people would look at my brand and say, "Wow, they've withstood no matter like what it took." And that would be like the real sort of core and meat of the brand. And after 20 years, and we're getting close to 25, people take us seriously. And so what I started to do was realize the naysayers are just going to be there. Like, even with ambition, like, "You can't get into the schools. You don't understand that. You don't have." I'm like, "Well, have you ever walked into a school and asked if you could help?" Because I'm pretty sure there are going to be a lot of them that say, "Yes, please." And sure enough, there were. So I realized I could fret all day long about people who are about the naysayers, or I could just say, "You know what, if you're not my cheerleader, you can't play in my sandbox." Like, that's just a
that
much
what you do?
easier rule of thumb. Yep. And doesn't mean my cheerleaders won't give me constructive criticism.
For sure.
And I started to realize too that the people, the naysayers, right, are the people who say you can't, and they start telling you how you should do things and what you should do. And I discovered the best answer with ambition when people tell me how to run a nonprofit. I just very, very politely say, "Remind me the name again of your nonprofit."
I like that.
But the people who are really your support system, if they don't get something or feel right about something, they ask you questions.
Yep.
And you have conversation. So it became just really simple for me. Like, and that person might be a great cheerleader for someone else. But I think, like in life in general, the puzzle pieces has to fit.
Was there like
have to
a
fit.
time where that transition happened where you realized that you want to surround yourself with people that are
Yes.
cheerleaders?
Yes. I mean, I
did that
think
happen?
I've always sort of known that, but it really, I'd say honestly, 8, 10 years ago is when it really hit. Like, I've thought that for so long, but I looked around it like, I like everybody to be friends and like each other and be together. And you start realizing certain dynamics, right, just don't work. And I would say honestly, the last 5 years is when I've really just said, like, I've got to be really clear about the dynamics in my life and when the puzzle pieces
They're
do
really
fit.
intentional about it.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with someone when they're when we don't fit. I always think about, it's kind of a silly analogy, but when someone talks horribly about an ex, and that ex can end up being a great partner for someone else, or someone will say, "You should date my brother. He's amazing." And it's like, you've never dated your brother.
Right.
Because everything comes down to, do the puzzle pieces fit or not? And I realized that wasn't just personally, that's especially true professionally.
Yeah, I want to go back to one thing you said real quick, because the word that was coming to my mind as she was talking about Chanel for 40 plus years before it became a name. You're 25 years in, and what you're doing with ambition is perseverance, and you obviously have to have it, right, to get your companies where they are. But where does that willingness as a visionary to stay the course and know I'm going to go there through the naysayers and everybody else, where do you find the strength, or where did the experiences come that reinforce that?
So some of it was probably growing up. I was a skier and seeing over the long haul how long it really takes to
get good.
Right. And again, this is a world now that, because we are so focused right on speed and momentum, and we look at like all the technology companies that frankly no one has any idea what was happening way before everyone heard of everything. That I have this new saying that's been going over really well when people talk about the overnight success. I'm like, 23 years is of ramen, 23 years of ramen is a lot of fucking sodium.
It's a salty path.
Oh my God, it's a salty path. And so I think, and everyone thinks they know the stories, right, of everyone's successes, but you don't know the nights, the people were belaboring and up, night after night and day after day and watching their bank account. And so I think for me though, like when I'm committed to something I love, I want to be all the way in there. And I wish I had it. I should grab it, actually. Someone sent me a text this morning about, and it was beautifully written. I really should grab it, about dedication and perseverance. And I feel like, we're, especially now, and I'm like working with teenagers, we're in this world now like that we've just sort of predetermined if something doesn't happen after this much time, it can't happen. But I've always been fascinated by the people who have successes in their 50s and 60s and 70s because they've worked all that time. So no matter how rough things got, and in 2008, luxury handbags, and I was mainstream at the time, and that's when I decided to go super high end. And it was a struggle, and then, going through some things personally, and then COVID. My industry was one that always was attacked, but I felt there was nothing in me that ever wanted to give up. And I think it's because I just feel like you put your eye on the prize, and it doesn't matter if it takes 10 years, 20 years. And I think that was always looking back to athletes and the growth that athletes have over a long, like even if you look at a young athlete, right, someone in their 20s, a baseball player, they probably have been playing ball since they were 5 years old. And we discount all that time now.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Well, we know, from knowing you, you've had a lot of life traumas.
Yes.
So, how have you used that in your own personal perseverance to, because a lot of people, the things that you've gone through would just give up or throw their hands up or say, hey, I got dealt bad cards, and not continue the way that you have. So what is it that
Kept me there.
kept you going and smiling like you are?
I think, watching my mom, so my mom was sick for 4 years. She was in a low-grade coma for almost 2, and then in and out of the hospital the next 2. And they never thought she'd live. She had 13 surgeries. She had a ruptured gallbladder that destroyed her organs, and back then they didn't have what they do now. So she finally got out of the hospital with a crazy will to live, and she was healthy. So I saw that, and I saw no matter what setbacks you have, you can keep going forward. And so that's what I saw. That's what I knew. And I think some of it's inside of you, right? I've always had this feeling, and I really don't know where it came from, or where it comes from, is that you have the control. Like, you can live your life two ways, right? You can let your life happen to you, or you can happen to your life. And I always knew that was a choice. And I would have this argument with people who would over nature and nurture. And for me, it didn't matter what anyone said. It was clear as day, you get to choose. So in fact, so my mom gets out of the hospital and like back on a great trajectory. And then I was raped when I was 25. And at the time, the Rape Crisis Center was sort of where everyone went. This is in 1988. And I was in the car and I was listening to this commercial, and you hear this droning, almost like dark shadows, like gothic music. And then this woman comes in, her voice, and she said, "I was raped and I'll never let a man touch me again." And I thought, wow, I feel like I'm being told. And this was literally 2 weeks after it happened to me.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, I feel like someone's telling me how I have to
Behave in this moment.
behave. This was some whack job, and who knows what was going on in his world. This was not about me. It happened to me, and I'm not going to let this person take my life away. I don't have to. There's no rule book that says that. I remember getting home and calling my mom. It's so funny getting home and calling my mom because there was no such thing at the time, talking when you're driving. And I said, I feel like I'm being instructed. And I'm making this decision right now, this one night. That's all this person gets. And I'll recover physically. And so funny enough, I moved to LA right after that. And I wanted to get involved with the Rape Crisis Center because I thought, gosh, I want to have more conversations around this, because I'm just floored that this is the messaging. Like, the messaging probably never hit me because I hadn't been raped. And mine was like a stranger attack.
Something that happens to other people out there. And
Yes. And so this is pre-internet, pre-all that. I go to the Rape Crisis Center out in Santa Monica, and I just can't connect with anybody. Like, they have one person running everything, and the volunteer. And I realized, like, I don't even know if that's how I want to do this. I want to be really proactive. And I had a friend who said, one of my best friends has a self-defense schools. That would be an interesting place to have these conversations, because why do people go to self-defense schools? And this was a women's self-defense school. They either have been raped, or they're afraid of it, or their parent wants them to be prepared because they're going to college. So I thought that would be really interesting. And I'd like to talk about prevention now. And the second I say that, there's a chorus of people saying, well, prevention, they were making it sound like that was your fault. And I said, I was walking down a dark street at 10:30 at night. That's not a decision I would want anyone's daughter to make. Doesn't mean it was my fault, but could I have made a better decision? Would I walk through a dark parking lot by myself? You've got to think about those things. And it wasn't by any means my fault, but had I made a decision of things that I do and don't do, and one of them is walk by myself down a dark street at 10:30 at night, this wouldn't have happened. So students like going to college, having buddy systems, and those are the things I want to talk about. And so I sit down with this room of about 80 women, and we all sit on the floor on these floor mats at this big gym. And I said, raise your hand if you've been sexually assaulted. Like 3 hands go up, maybe 5, maybe 4 or 5. So I said, okay. So I tell them what happened. And then there's a very strange part to this story. I start sharing with them that after this happened, and I couldn't quite put the order of pieces together, these bright lights come. And I realize, and I'm, completely like messed up, and my shirt is shredded, but I had just been to LA, and I came out and went to Nordstrom's to buy this Pepe jean jacket, which was just coming out. And it's funny, I wasn't in fashion at the time.
That brand way back.
Oh my gosh! So I wanted this jacket more than anything. So I get it. And so I have the jacket on when this happens.
So you're telling them the story.
Yes,
now.
I'm telling this whole story. And I said, and it's amazing how your mind will protect you too. So I became fixated on like my jacket because they're going to take my jacket for evidence. So I decide based on everything in my mind, they'll have enough evidence without the jacket. So
Wow.
I'm going to get myself out of the jacket. And again, I'm all like, I'm sore and I'm scraped. And I get myself out of the jacket somehow and I roll over. And now I hear an ambulance or a siren. And I roll over and I shove this under a rock because I'm going to go get it the next day. And I honestly think like that did protect me in the moment. I became so fixated on the jacket. And the funny thing is that I ended up in fashion. And so I'm telling this story. And while I'm telling the story, everyone starts to laugh. And I said, remind me again how many people here have been raped. And 30 hands went up.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Or sexually assaulted. Yeah.
Wow.
And I realized in that moment, because everyone always jumps in and said, well, you made them comfortable. I'm like, people laughed. And the second you smile and laugh, you cannot be sad. It's fucking impossible.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are.
It's like a therapy.
It's a therapy.
It is.
And so, like, that's when the light really went on for me about the choice, the choice and the control you have. And it doesn't mean it's not easy, or that it's easy, and it doesn't mean you don't have to talk to people and figure this out and seek whatever it is, but the choice is yours. And I just kept going to that space of like, do I let this person take any more from me than that action? And so that's kind of how I drove forward and has been my mentality. And so as I'm going through starting this business and, doing this and having people tell me it was impossible. And then sometimes it actually gets to the point, right, you're embarrassed around certain people to tell them your dreams because you just know they're looking at you like you're crazy. And so then, of course, in 2011, my mother was murdered. And, that is something, like, that's a word you just don't think will ever come into your vortex. And it was brutal. And what happened to her was just horrific. And I remember right afterwards, so many people would say to me, you just have to believe that, like, she was scared because they didn't know what happened, and she had a heart attack. And that's even where that thought process
To like
came.
appease your own mind.
Yes.
It's for you.
Yes. And I kept thinking, I hate to sound so brutal, but when your mother is murdered, then please tell me.
Yeah.
And people would say, oh, yeah, I lost my mom too. And I'm like, I had lost my dad. And that was horrific because I love my dad, but I lost him the way you'd want a parent to go. And it was not the same. And so, in fact, I remember I was driving with my best friend, and I said, gosh, the most amazing thing is I've not met anyone who's been through this. And I actually called the detectives, and I asked for the percentage of murders in the country every year. And he said, it's low. It's actually 13,000 murders a year. It's very unlikely that you will meet someone in your close circle who's been through this. You might meet someone who knows someone who had, but no, you're probably it's unlikely that you'll have a friend that says, oh yeah, my mom was murdered as well. So as we're having this conversation, we walk into my bank, and our branch manager named Tony, he said, I haven't seen you in a couple weeks. And I said, yeah. And I told him what happened. And he just went dead silent. And then he looks at me and he said, my dad was murdered for the change in his pocket at a convenience store. Mm. And I smiled and I looked at Rosie and I said, oh my gosh. I said, I just met I used to call that my Me Too until the Me Too era.
Pre-Me Too.
Pre-Me Too, exactly. And we used to always have an expression, there's always a Me Too. Mm. And now we know there's always a Me Too. Mm. And so I looked at him and I said, and we'd gotten to know each other over the years. He said, oh my God, I never tell anyone. I never share that. I said, what made you just share it with me? And he said, yeah, I don't know, you were so empowered. I thought, I want you to know there's someone else, like I got your back. And he was so instrumental in my having a great place to talk about this. And I remember when I would talk to him, or I'd share the story, people would say, I don't know how you put on the happy face when you're going through something like that. Like, you got to really, like, kind of be someone else to be able to do that. I said, no, I think what I realized is this is the most horrific thing I'll ever go through in my life. It's the worst, like, the fact that this happened is still so surreal. But sort of in context of making those choices, I realized, so I'm like happy Nancy. Am I now an unhappy person, or am I happy Nancy who's going through something? I'm like, I'm going to choose that. Because if I can hold on to my disposition, and it doesn't mean, again, that you don't have anger and all those feelings, but if I can make sure that I'm still this happy, vital person who's going through something really hard, then I can get through this.
How long does that take? Because you seem in control of how you respond to hardship.
Yeah.
Right? But how
Terrible traumatic hardship.
Yeah, really hard things.
Like one
Does
after
it
the
take
other.
you a minute to have space to mourn or whatever, and then cognitively decide this, or over the years have you just immediately become conditioned to that?
I think I become conditioned because I also know I'm going to have a lot of conversation about it. I'm not going to bury it because, and it's
You're very
funny.
realistic about it.
Very, and so many people, though, if you don't go down that rabbit hole right away, they say, oh, you haven't dealt with this. I'm like, oh, I fully dealt with it. In fact, and people saying to me, you just need to, again, remember that your mom was probably just scared. And I'm like, so as I'm dealing with this, we've got to figure out who did this. Like, there's more to it than my mom got scared because someone broke in. Like, and sure enough, I think that was even therapeutic going through it because now I had sort of a sense of purpose around it.
So they didn't catch the person right away.
They did not. And so the case goes cold, and then it's cold for up to what was 5 years.
Wow.
And it's interesting, too, because I think when you're going through something really hard, right, you have those ups and downs. But if you keep your disposition, you're able to navigate through them. If you don't decide like that this can overtake you. And sort of the same thing as when I was raped, when I thought about my mom, I'm like, the last thing she'd want is for this to have taken her life and now mine. So I have to like kind of sort of do a 180, and I have to drive forward in honor of her life.
How close were those two events?
Quite a
Time.
ways. So I was raped in 1988, and then my dad died in 2000, and my mom was murdered in 2011. So it seems like every decade.
Every decade,
kind of
life gives you
Yes.
a tough hand.
Yes.
We're going to pass this decade, I think.
And so, yeah, I think it's become sort of autopilot for me. And granted, like one thing that I was just sharing this story. So, you know, with my business, right, there was 2008 and things were, hard, and then this happens. And one of the things I did was I wanted to find a way to distract myself. And this was actually interesting because this was getting, doing the investigation, because it seemed like they were actually on it. So one of the things I did was, because it was already a struggle financially with the economy, I discovered that the one greatest distraction is if you have financial difficulties, right, and organizational difficulties in your company. And so I created chaos there. Because any time that it was too much to deal with my mom's, I had to, Mr. Visa wanted to get paid.
Yeah.
And so I made a mess of my company. And I would try to tell people that, and they'd say, no, you're all good, because my demeanor is so great. And I started to realize, actually, from that, I had an intern that was a part-time employee. And she was telling me one day what she hates about LA is all the smoke and mirrors people put up. And I had this epiphany, and I'm like, I don't know. I think a lot of us like to see things through smoke and mirrors. We decide how things are for people. Because I was now realizing that my mom could be murdered and I could be in financial straits, and I could tell that to people and they'd go, you're all good. Because that's what they wanted to believe.
Right.
And so that's been actually a really useful lesson for me now, is that it's on everybody.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So, so I think this idea that you can draw to a place where you can control those things, and again, not in the sense of controlling your emotions, but that you get to be sort of, the master of how you respond.
Yeah.
And why can't I hold on to my disposition, find the people that I'm really close with when I really need to go to them, and that's served me well.
It sounds like the choice that we were talking about, making a choice,
Yes,
is really the empowering part.
That's
I don't know if you read the book by Edith Edgar, The Choice.
the choice. I have not.
But it talks about that same concept of
You're just living it.
You just
you didn't have to
right,
read.
you don't have to read the book. You live it. You live it every day. But I guess that's the question would be from about your mom and her legacy. Is that what you're living? Her legacy of the choice that she made of, hey, I want to get better and be healthy. And now you're kind of, is that something you're living now?
Oh, completely. And
That's your inspiration.
That is. I mean, nobody thought she would survive. And she was kind of funny. People would say, I can't imagine like being, unconscious while you're teenagers. And she's like, and this was actually her choice of humor, because she would say, are you kidding me? I'm sleeping, being fed in the hospital while I'm a teenager. I got to wake up, and my daughter was pretty on point. Like,
this is all right.
It's kind of relaxing.
Like I did this passively.
So is that where you got your humor from?
I think so. And sometimes it's so morbid people can't, but it's really the thing that gets you through.
Yeah.
And I think like we've attached so much, right, to the superficial, to the, to words, and but yeah, I feel like I am living kind of our legacy. So I saw someone really resilient, and I loved how that looked.
Well, let's transition. That's such a beautiful foundation of your ability to persevere, overcome, visionary, attacking with optimism. Take us back, because I heard the story on another podcast about how you decided to found Jamah. But can you start with, you're living back in the Midwest in Detroit, and you just pack up and move to the West Coast. What made you to move to California? And then will you walk us through the story of the day you decided to found Jamah?
Yeah. So when I was deciding where to go to college, I remember my dad pulled out a map, and he said, your grades are good. You've got some choices. And he said, he takes this map and he puts his the pencil on Michigan. And he said, when we moved here, you had to come with us. If you didn't, we'd go to jail. That's why we couldn't leave you. He said, but now this is the first adult choice you get to make, right, is if and where you go to college. Because for the first time, nobody has to go to college. Right? Even a kid who's threatened by a trust fund can still say
No.
no.
Yeah.
So he said, so if I were you, I'd explore, I'd experience something completely different. And he took the pen, I remember, and he drew it all the way to California. And then I noticed it stopped in Flagstaff, Arizona on the way. And I'm a big skier. And I said, I want to go to NAU. And I was fixated. And no one I knew even knew of NAU, or that there was not just skiing, but incredible skiing in Flagstaff. And so I applied and got myself there. And in fact, while I was there, because now, of course, we're paying out-of-state tuition, I came up with this really great idea, and I mapped it out that if I spent the summer at summer school in Hawaii, then I could graduate a semester early and save on the out-of-state tuition.
That was smart.
It was smart.
You sold that to your parents.
I totally sold it. Totally sold it. And so I did that and did summer school in Hawaii. That was amazing. And then after that, I decided I'm going to come back to California. And just for that, it was sort of, I don't even know where, so I became hell-bent on living on the East Coast. Just so that I could do that and make sure that decision was
Check
right.
the box and
Yes.
be like, yeah.
So I did. I lived in D.C. for my last semester doing an internship, and then moved to Boston. And at the time, I think I was trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, what industry, how that applied. I started a business actually in Boston right out of college, doing staffing in the event industry. And it kind of spiraled upwards. It was so hard, and I didn't really, my personality could do it, but I didn't really understand the guts of a business. And then I realized this is just not for me, and I want to move to California. This is time now. And then in between, that decision and actually going is when I was raped. And then, and I wanted to also, it was weird how I even thought of this. I'm like, I don't want to go to California because of what happened. So I had to get really clear on that. So I came out here not really knowing what to do, but because I had been in the event industry, I thought, well, I'll go into the event industry just to get myself settled. And I was always into fashion. In fact, my mom said to me one day, it's so funny, you used to care so much about what you wore, and then when you got into the fashion industry, you started living in yoga pants and a t-shirt. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's so true, because my expression of fashion was in my shopping. And so I thought, I'm going to go into the fashion industry. Then I started noticing something out here. And I had someone say this one day. He said, you smile so much, no one's ever going to take you seriously. And he said, you walk into a room and you're tall and, striking, and no one will ever take you seriously. So I started thinking, oh gosh, well, if I do all that and the fashion industry, he's probably right. And it's so sad to me now that I actually thought he's probably right. So I want people to take me seriously, because the thing I noticed was how often people would talk to me, and a few minutes into the conversation, they'd say, oh my gosh, you are really articulate. You are so much smarter than I thought. You looked at me and decided and judged my intellect. And so I decided to become a technical writer based on that. I thought
That's an interesting
it's
transition.
so strange. I still look back and people say, well, where, how, why? I cannot answer that question.
I wouldn't have bridged that.
Never.
Well, it's your way of saying, hey, I am smart.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I thought, and I'll work with companies like Bank of America and Transamerica. And I did. And it was so not me, obviously. And so I thought, now it's time. And I was talking to my folks one day, and I said, I have got to own that I'm a designer, that I should, being in the fashion industry. When I was in college, I'd wardrobe everybody. And so I'm having this conversation with my folks, and shortly after, this package comes, and it was an Apple computer. And I opened the box, and there's a little sticky that just said, you're a creative, now act like one.
Wow.
And just the thought, too, of my folks in a store buying a computer.
An Apple computer.
So it was time, and I called an old friend of mine from college, and I said, it sounds crazy, but I'm going into fashion. I'm going to be a designer. And she said, duh, we all knew that about you. You've been this is not surprising to, because I thought everybody would think it was crazy. And I thought, why didn't someone tell me this along the way? I could have saved a decade of technical writing. And so I knew someone at the time who did gifting in the entertainment industry. And I started working with her. And then from that, I realized I wanted to get into more into retail. And at the time, gifting in the entertainment industry was a really big deal. The industry's changed so much. It used to be like producers, a part of the reputation was what they bought for their cast and crew. So it's just not that way anymore. So I realized I wanted to get into retail. I started loving being at the factories. And then I split from my business partner and really forged ahead and just realized, all my years in Detroit, this was always so interesting. Right, Detroit's the home of the greatest designers really in the world. And nobody acknowledges that because people go right to fashion, which is all about Europe, right? And big houses and ateliers. And one day I thought, how is it that like we're one of the most progressive countries in the world, right? We have everything here. We have amazing designers here. Why don't we have a luxury brand here? And I know the fast answer is, well, we're a new country. But we're not so new that we shouldn't have that kind of innovation. And I realized, wow, if you are in Europe in fashion, you use these very beautiful words like atelier and craftsmanship and curated, and that exact same thing here is described as manufacturing, production, and factory. So not sexy.
Right.
And that was literally when the light went on, when I had that epiphany. I'm like, we have to change the verbiage. And it literally started right there for me to realize I do what they do. Now, the tricky part is if I start saying that here, people are going to look at me like I'm a whack job, right? I'm going to go to my atelier. So I would just say it to myself. And I realized what I needed was great sewers. And then what I realized, what matters to me, what makes a brand beautiful. And I had real customization, not fast fashion. In fact, I was working with this one company in Japan. They wanted to bring I have a really beautiful diaper bag that's sort of a does-it-all bag. And he said, we want to sell those. And I said, well, we do everything made to order. And so it'll take a while. He said, oh, no, our clients love that because that means it's something really special. And
they lean into it even more.
Completely.
They're like, oh, it's going to take 6 months?
Yes, that's exactly.
No one else will have one like it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I realized even on my basic web, classic collection, if you just know your bag is being made for you, that's really special. So we actually video, you can buy a video where we do the whole process of your bag.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Or if not, we send you the first cut being made with your nameplate.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like, and then I thought, I want to do personalization. Not like initials, but what if you have a love story and you want to gift this bag? We want to put that in the bag. And we want to let people decide their colors and and of course I have to make sure it doesn't go outside of the brand. So of course, the first thing people ask is, well, how are you going to scale that? And I thought, just like my nonprofit, when I started Ambition, everyone asked about scaling. And I thought, God, that's the culture we live in.
Right.
I want to just breathe into this business because if you do things right, scaling happens to you.
Yeah.
And I'm of that mind. And so, again, I could wait 20 years. I could wait 10 years. And so that's been, it's been...
So why
You're
bags?
not focused on the exit.
Exactly.
Why'd you pick bags over
because
other things?
I was obsessed with the fact that you could take this total utility, right? A bag is just to carry your shit. That's it. But you could
Speaking of eloquent.
Exactly.
You can say that in French.
Right. Exactly. So, but you can take this bag and you can actually, that's just about a function, and you can make it beautiful, and you could actually make it so that when people pick it up, they rise up, and it can change every outfit you have. You can wear jeans and a t-shirt or something really beautiful, and it can shift everything you wear. And so and also, to be really honest with you, in clothing, there's grading, with all the sizes. That's just with bags. If I want a smaller one, I just design a smaller bag. And that just seemed more efficient.
It always fits.
You know,
Yes.
my favorite part about all that, though, is she used the words within brand, AKA, if your taste sucks, I'm not going to do that. We'll help you get there so it's still a pretty bag.
Yeah.
So if Gabe or I design a bag for our wives, you'll help us.
Yes.
Yeah, we're gonna need help.
Yeah.
I'll take over. And so, yeah, I think this whole idea of like scale, 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 and even in fact, it was funny when I was starting the nonprofit, and I looked back to like, you know, the big, well-known nonprofits like Boys and Girls Clubs, and these were one-man clubs, right? These were one group. They didn't. Boys and Girls Club was not started by someone saying, "How do we scale?" It was there to help people. And they did it well, and people started to know about this, and scaling happened. And so now it's become, right, the second you have an idea, people go, think about your exit. How are you going to scale? Think about your exit. And my mind just, that didn't suit me, Nancy Gale, in the way that I think and do things.
But I did hear you say that you wanted your name to be that, you know, feature name,
Yes.
you know, I don't know, Bloomingdale's or wherever, I don't know, but
I want to be like in the
you
same.
said Chanel.
I want to be known in the same.
How
breath.
do you manufacture the way you do, but stay true to Jamah while having that same Chanel-esque level?
So I think when I say I want to be like said in the same, known in the same breath as Chanel and Hermes, it's more by reputation, by being this just esteemed quality name. And being made in the USA was everything for me. And that's a lot of my Detroit roots too, seeing what came out of the auto industry. And so I want to be of that name, but be doing a lot of custom work. What ends up happening is at the with my website, with my classic collection, the more people know about what we do with the custom pieces, the more people start to know the brand. And so we can like stack our factory. We can have morning shifts and night shifts. We can stay with, when you order a bag, it could be 2 to 6 weeks, because we want to change the feeling around that. And so, and I know this just sounds crazy, but the way that this brand has worked is we've sort of grown into everything. So we're doing what we do, aspiring to that name, and we'll figure it out along the way, which is how big companies used to, that's the way you build. And I think I'm older also, so I think I have just a different philosophy of the way that a company will go. And that may be crazy because that's not how the world is now, but I think it still is.
I love
I think
it.
there's both sides of that.
You know, I saw your eyes light up when you talked about like the bag, how it helps you rise up. Does that connect to your nonprofit ambition in any way, or how do you connect the businesses? Can you talk about ambition and what it's all about?
Good
So-
transition, Gabe.
Well done.
Yeah. I like the rise up
Yes.
with the bag.
I saw you do it.
coin
He's on point.
I saw you do it.
I love it, but you gave words to the action. It's great. So just to give you some background, Ambition is an entrepreneurial program for disadvantaged youth. And it started because of my belief, like, in the dinner table, and which, like, we don't have as much of that anymore. So I always say I grew up at sort of the ideal dinner table. And I was, you know, like we talked earlier, was told that, like, the world was my oyster. And I started thinking, as I got older, well, what happens if you didn't grow up at my dinner table? And believe me, that's not to say there weren't fights at my dinner table and all the stuff that goes down when you're teenagers. But what I realized is the real difference, right, between the haves and the have-nots is access and exposure. That's really the real difference. And so in my life, it didn't matter where my dad's struggles and challenges and success were for my mom or my dad. It was that I had access and I had exposure. And I kept thinking, where do you get that if you didn't grow up at my dinner table? So that was really the inception of Ambition, is how do we bring my dinner table to kids that don't have what I did? And what does that look like? It looked like mentorship and consistency. Like, those were the two things I could point to at my dinner table when, whether it was my folks or they had friends over, then that was the mentorship. And we were at the dinner table every night. So it was the consistency. So that's really like what ambition was founded upon. And then in early 2000, right, everything was about cause marketing. And it drove me crazy because I started to look around going, it's sort of like find a cause, any cause, act like you care, and then market the shit out of that. And that just didn't sit with me. And
it didn't feel organic.
it didn't feel organic.
Forced. Yeah, authentic's a good word.
And then I noticed when I was talking about this, at the time we were talking to some maybe potential investors. And this is sort of gets into the whole fast, move. And they kept saying, Nancy, you've got to become really financially sound. Then you can worry about like those kids. I'm like, on my worst day, I have it better than a lot of these kids. And waiting for what? Is it 3 cars, 6 cars, 9 cars, 2 homes, 7 homes?
Yeah.
When is like that?
What's
won't
enough?
happen. What's enough? And believe me, I love money. Like it's really pretty.
It fits into your bag.
It's into my bag. Yes, exactly. And I'm like, how do you do both organically and authentically? So I thought, well, the first thing that comes to everybody is, well, we'll give a percentage of, our profits to these causes. And I thought, here's what happens with that kind of work. If you don't like bind your cause with your commerce so intrinsically that one will fail if the other one does, the second you're in any kind of financially uncomfortable situation,
Cut bait.
that's it.
Yeah.
Those kids, they'll wait. So I'm like, I want to marry this so much that's not a choice because that's the only way that I know.
So you're not taking the investment capital from those guys, I'm guessing.
No,
You're like,
no.
yeah, sorry, dudes.
Yep. And I mean, yeah, you could tell the second I talked about ambition to anyone who was interested that way. And again, I'm like, well, I'll wait. I'll just go along. I'll trudge along. And fortunately, I run the Jamah so tightly that I could do that. I didn't have these crazy expenses. I learned how to manage the company without all of those. So I thought, what if all the people that worked for Jamah found a way to also be part of ambition, whether they would come mentor, whether it's my graphic designer and I say, can you do this at a discount? Can you, I'll ask everyone in my circles. So eventually we have this community where if you're working for Jamah, you're also participating in the growth of these kids. And that felt really good. And then with that, we could say, we'll do a percentage of this bag promotion or all of the, whatever that is. But for me, it's like the success of Jamah gives me the bandwidth to run ambition. And then the success of ambition helps me like with Jamah, because what's happened now is I have clients that are not only donating to our scholarship fund for ambition, but starting to come to class and work with our students.
That's awesome.
So that's where it's amazing, because when you're working with the level of clients that I have, they're exactly who I want my students to meet.
Well, so you're taking these people that don't have access to these kind of resources and connecting them to the ultimate resources. I love what you were saying on the way up too, is that, the next generation has to learn that money's not a bad thing, and you're helping them learn it. How many of those students, mini entrepreneurs, are you putting through in a year? And like, how do you qualify, like who gets to be a part of that?
So we were working as an in-school program. So the kids were coming because they were part of a particular class that we took over. We're now, and it's really exciting, this is our first year, we're starting to form partnerships. And so we're sort of in the trenches right now, and we're taking the program out of the schools into partnerships with like KidWorks and Brotherhood Crusade and Boys and Girls Club.
Like after school kind of programs?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Because what's happened, I was hell-bent on being an in-school program for a long time. And I'm glad I was, because it taught us a lot. And it gave us, when you're small, like the most interesting thing about the nonprofit world I learned is people will say, oh, we'll give you a little donation, but we give our big donations to the big guys. And I'm like, that actually seems backwards to me.
Right. The big guys already have it.
They have
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe just at least change those numbers a bit. And so, so being in an in-school program gave us a legitimacy. And then Richard Bransom being your first special guest gives you a like
We heard
whole
that.
next
Yeah, I
level.
saw Virgin as a sponsor.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So I
Sir Richard is not easy to get his attention.
oh my God, it was so
Oh, when you're Nancy Gale.
yay, there you go.
You can get anybody's
Yes.
attention.
So what I realized in doing this, in running the program was it becomes really hard to figure out like what's that through line that everybody needs. And I know like financial literacy is the word of the day and we have our own thoughts on that. But the one thing that no kid will not use is marketing. Right? Like that, whether they're going on a job interview, trying to get into college, trying to
100%.
meet people, like that's the most important thing, even if you want to be a doctor or a mechanic.
Like marketing yourself.
Marketing yourself. So I thought, what if we do these projects where we turn everything into a marketing campaign? So we ask the students, who do you want to meet? Or sometimes I say, I'll tell you who you want to meet. And so Richard Bransom was who I told them that they wanted to meet. And I happened to meet a gal that was the head of Virgin Airlines, or CMO of Virgin Air at the time, just really briefly at a breakfast. And so talked to the kids. I said, you want to meet him? Let's make a video. And the video is not, we want to meet you. It's making this person, whoever you're reaching out to, feel that they're missing out if they don't meet you. So we put this,
amazing.
right? Like, because otherwise you're just another person, like, you know, you're like a fan, like a fangirl. And so we put this video together about why Richard Branson would be missing out if he didn't meet these kids. I sent it to this gal, and it was lovely because she got right back to me with a phone call saying, can you meet with Richard and his crew today at 2 o'clock?
Today?
They're at the Sunset.
Wow.
At 5 o'clock, they're at the Sunset Marquee. It was 2 p.m. And literally, Domino's had just delivered a pizza. And I had like 3 or 4 people that were working with me at the time at the house. And we hang up, and I'm like, I just got a call from Virgin that we could go to the Sunset Marquee. I'm like, I need students. So, and we're new. So I called the school. I'm like, can you help me? And this is the funniest thing. One of the gals I talked to at the school, she thought I said Richard Branson. She somehow heard Branagh and decided Kenneth Branagh. So she couldn't understand why I thought it was so important that these kids meet him.
I don't even know who that
So,
is.
oh my God.
They didn't either.
Right? So I call a guy on the board. I said, I'm having some trouble here, but they don't want the students to meet Richard Branson. And he said, what? I said, I need as many of these kids. And we're like down in like Hawthorne, like Compton, up at the Sunset Marquee. I don't know how we end up getting them. I get a camera crew from Loyola, and we get to the Sunset Marquee where you can't film. So I talked to the manager. I said, you can't not let these kids have evidence of this. So they allowed us cameras, and we spent an hour with him. And
amazing.
it was amazing. And then we started doing these reach out videos to different celebrities. And so actually, and then we had 2 of the funniest stories. Actually, prior to that, I was commissioned to do bags for Bill Clinton and his family from, there's a organization, and every year they gift their biggest donors. And so this year, and then that person's their keynote. And this year it was going to be Bill Clinton. So they said, we wanted to do leather bags this year. And then they loved ambition. They loved that I was made in the USA. So they said, you'll come down and you'll present them to him. And so I'm like, can I bring a bunch of my students? And they said, absolutely.
Even better.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and he was a hoot. And the coolest thing was, it didn't matter where anyone I knew was politically. No. All I heard was, you're designing bags for a president? Like, that's super cool. Yeah. For the kids to get to meet a president, someone they never thought in their life.
Yeah.
And so after I did my bag presentation, we started talking about ambition, and he looks at security. He said, when my speech is finished, I'm going to meet Nancy and her students in the kitchen. We're at the Ritz in Laguna. So we end up in the kitchen with him and a bunch of our students, and they, to this day, like, will never forget that.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It was so crazy. So then we had a couple things that were really cool. One of them was we meet this actor from a Disney show. His name is David Henry. I don't watch Disney shows.
We should flash a picture of David Henry.
Exactly, right.
When she
right.
says that.
And
maybe the other lady I didn't know. Brenna something.
Right, yeah, Kenneth Branagh. So the kids shoot, I can't believe I'm just blanking. The show was Wizards of Waverly Place on Disney.
Oh yeah, my kids watch that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that was
don't
the
know Henry?
answer. Everyone.
I don't, but they do.
He played the brother, the lead, with Selena Gomez.
Yep.
So we meet him actually at an Alder event, and he's there with Ben Everard. So I tell him about the class. So I go into class the next day, and Kyle Cox was with me, and I said, does anyone here watch Wizards of Waverly Place? And the kids start like fanning out. I said, do you know who David Henry is? They're like, oh my God, it's like the Beatles. So I said, why don't we do a reach out to David Henry? And so we put together this elaborate reach out as to why he needs to meet these kids. And they like appealed to him about his, he had one kid at the time, and the reach out's so great. So I send it to him, and then I come back to class and I tell the kids, unfortunately he was in Paris at the time. I said, but he did say we could have a FaceTime call with him. So the kids we get together in this horseshoe, and we have them on FaceTime, and it's super, super cool. And then the call drops, and he texts me, and I said, oh, he'll get back to us in a few minutes. He's going through a tunnel. And we always do jumping jacks in class, like to get the kids getting some energy, getting their blood going. So I said, let's just get up and do some jumping jacks. And of course, meanwhile, he's right outside. So they're doing the jumping jacks, and he just jumps in the room and starts doing the jumping jacks with him.
No way.
It was so freaking cool. Oh my gosh, it was so amazing.
Wow.
So we got to take a second to get your secret sauce, though, because you kind of glossed over it. You're doing what I would call self-advocacy. And it's something we spend a lot of time in my family at the dinner table talking about how to properly self-advocate. And so that's what you're doing. And you're doing it by changing the dynamic, right? Instead of why Richard Branson should, or instead of saying, hey, can we please meet you? You're setting it up in a way that he needs to meet you. Yeah. How does that work for somebody who needs that kind of inspiration, and how to self-advocate the right way?
So what I realized, I mean, and this is all like a shot in the dark for us, is let's just not even at the beginning of this think about that part of it. Let's just have the kids, because this is also a skill they need, research everything they can about this person, and then let's put this video together, and then let's find a way to make that happen, because if it happens once, that's all we need. And it doesn't, yes, and that will start seeping through the kids in the next year and the next year. So I just knew that if we could just wing it and do one and it worked, then we could just really ride with that. So it was super simple. And that's, I think, one of the things that's been great about the program is, you know, people would come to class sometimes and everyone has a million ideas and input and telling me all. And for me, I'm like, just go to it and just try it and don't worry about all those things, because all of that conversation taking place as to what might not work, what should work, how we should do this, is just taking up time. Let's just do it. It's not like some huge undertaking, and maybe it won't work, but it worked. Until we had, they wanted to meet the Clippers. So we do this whole big reach out, and I tell them, you know, we're waiting to hear, and we go on to FaceTime, and we end up meeting Lou Williams' manager, and he said, so Nancy hasn't told you. He said, I think she told you to meet in the parking lot on Friday the 13th at 5 p.m. And I said, yeah. I told them to do that. They thought we were doing some like exercise thing. He said, that's because we're picking you up and we're taking all of you and all your mentors to a VIP night at the stadium. We're going to have dinner. You're going to meet the players. You're going to sit on, watch the game. So the kids are dying. And I'm not kidding. We leave class. This is a Wednesday, March 11th of 2020. And by noon, the Clippers are not playing on Friday because COVID has hit. Yeah.
But I am interested in just hearing some of the impact, that Ambition's made, maybe an example or two that has really, changed lives.
So we've had a couple, one just really fun story. We had this one of our first scholarship winners, and at the time our scholarship was we'd get your ticket to wherever you're going to college if you're going out of state. If not, you'd get $200. And one of our students, Kathy, went to Smith, and we had a guest speaker. And normally we don't have one-time guest speakers unless they're living a life that they don't live here anymore, and they're that it's impossible. Otherwise, our mentors have to come once a month from September to June. Most of them come every week. So if we have a big speaker, there's a reason behind it. One of the speakers we had was, he goes by Googler 13. He was a 13th Google employee named Steve Schimmel. And funny enough, this particular student now, and that was, when he came out, that was in 2011. She's a VP at Google now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So crazy.
It's like the stars aligned.
Totally. And so some of our amazing stories.
And then she comes from a disadvantaged background,
Yes.
I'm guessing.
Yes. So we have this one student. I'll tell you two stories that are just really close to my heart. And I mean, there are many, many, many. So I have a student named Yessie. And Yessie would sit in the back of the room next to her best friend, Leslie, and would not speak. I mean, would not speak. She was so shy, she seemed scared. And so one day we were doing what we call our You Don't Know About Me's, which is where, actually, funny enough, formerly called There's Always a Me Too, which we just switched up. And so with a You Don't Know About Me, you get on camera and you tell your story with power, not pity. And then most importantly, you talk about how you got through it or how you're trying to get through it. Because what we're seeing now with the Me Too movement, and there's much greatness to that, I think, but we're hearing a lot of people ranting, and we're not hearing people talk about how they got through anything, right? It's not solution driven. It's let me tell you my story. But I see these stories, and I don't, whether you were raped or had a parent murdered or you've made progress in your life. So tell kids how you did that. That's what they need to hear. And so I said to Yessie, can we talk? And there's something going on here. I want you to do a You Don't Know About Me. And we just went back and forth and talked about our story. So I got to learn what had sort of produced this very shy, meek young lady. And so she gets on camera, and there are 50 people in the room in this big camera. And she tells a story of how she came home one day with her mom to find her dad with his mistress, and he was being deported. This was in 3rd grade. And she shut down. And then she became afraid to ask for help. And then she was angry. And of course, she watched her mother, who was angry and sad and scared. And then when Ambition started, she started to reach out. She believed she had people who were behind her. And again, that's because of the consistency. And she told this story. It was another person that came out of her. And she's 26 now, and we are very, very close. She's graduated college. And I did it, just aged her a couple of years. She's actually 24. She graduated college, and she's actually right now in the midst of interviewing with Habitat for Humanity. She's a mentor of ours now. She does our social media. She is thriving and growing and seeing that moment. And in fact, and I always tell this story, she called me one day, she texted me, and this is when she was already coming out of her shell and people were seeing a very different Yessie, but I get a text and it said, call me immediately. So I call her. She said, I have to tell you what happened. I'm at Deloitte and Tush. And she said, it's got a weird name. She said, but I saw Uncle Ken, and Uncle Ken was one of our mentors. We call him our sort of modern day Mr. Rogers. He was an 80-year-old venture capitalist who came to our class every week. And she said, I looked over and Uncle Ken's here. He's in a meeting with like 8 gentlemen. She said, you'll never believe what I did. And as she starts to tell me, Ken texts me. He said, you must call me immediately. She said, I walked right over to him and I stood up tall and I said, Uncle Ken. And she said, and then I walked in that circle and I shook everybody's hand and introduced myself to every person in that room.
Wow.
And I drove home we drove through Beverly Hills and I saw all these women sitting at these cafes and I thought, I'm going to work really hard because one day I'm going to be a woman sitting at those cafes because I've earned it.
Wow.
That was amazing.
What did Ken say when he called you?
Literally word for word the same thing.
He was proud of her?
He was so proud, and he had seen the transition. And we saw the shift, I'm not kidding, the day she did her You Don't Know About Me.
Just telling her story.
Just telling her story and the whole power, not pity, because we tend to tell those stories, right, with weakness.
Yeah, feel embarrassed or feel ashamed or...
Yes, and when you tell those stories with power, you know what it does? It gets someone else to say, just like Tony at my bank. Yeah. That happened to me.
Yeah.
Because
it's inspirational.
Yes, right? Because weakness begets weakness. And it doesn't, this is not to say you have to pretend it didn't hurt, but when you use strength in your voice, it changes everything.
It's about resolve, when you've resolved your way through those issues and leveled up,
Yes. So then we have a student, Amia, who she is 26 now. She gets up and tells the class her You Don't Know About Me. Her father was murdered, shot by the police, holding up. Sorry, I'm mixing my words. He was shot by the police in what looked like a crime. Like they still don't have answers to what happened, but he was shot and killed. So she starts talking in that story how meeting me and learning about my mom was game-changing for her. And that's where we used to call it. She said, I didn't realize I had a me too until Nancy told her story. And so that moment, and I'll actually show you the video, it's mind-blowing to see her posturing and the way she was one of the most angry students. Her persona, her mood could change a room of 100 people. And now she is just soaring. So, and then we have another student who, when we met her, Michaela, she wanted to go to an HBCU, but never felt like everyone was against that, but her grandma. And we ended up getting to know her grandma and working with her, and she's a sophomore now at Texas Southern.
Wow.
So we have so many, the stories go on and on. I have one of our students is actually, her name's Catherine, and she's at UC Riverside. And we would talk a lot about capitalism. And of course, they're in an environment, and this is what's happening in the schools, where we realize we can do much more work outside of the schools now. Because there's such a hatred for capitalism, because no one really understands or teaches what it is.
Yeah.
And she said to me, I'm going to become the most conscientious capitalist, because I realize making money can help people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it can help my family, it can help people. And then she said, we're told so much about all these ugly capitalists. She said, and I realized every single week this group of 15 to 20 people show up for us. And that argues this whole point that they're,
Right.
yeah. And she said,
counter to it.
That's the
Yeah.
mentors, right?
Yes, yes. And I said, I'm not saying that there aren't greedy capitalists. There's greed
everything.
in any space, whether it's over money or power. But that was pretty amazing for me because realizing there's this student who wants to make an impact and change the world and give to things, and then realizing if I want to give that money, I have to make that money.
Yep,
Yeah.
comes from somewhere. Well, we could continue for maybe another whole day with you. You're so easy to talk to.
And inspirational.
Very
Thank
inspirational.
you for doing what you do.
This is great.
Well, we're going to transition to rapid fire.
All right, first one is, what can you do today that you were not capable of doing 5 years ago?
Owning my space in this world.
I like that space. It's so important. So my question says, what makes you smile? But you smile at everything. So I think the question is,
What doesn't make you
Wait,
smile?
can I just tell you, I have to give you just a little sidebar. I'm not kidding. Just yesterday, my fiance found this post. He said, you must have written it. And it says, I love to smile. I'm a happy little fucker.
By the way, congratulations on
congratulations.
when did he become your fiance?
Last Wednesday.
Oh,
a
wow.
week ago.
Wait, is he what makes you smile
Oh,
most?
you know what? Everything makes me smile, but he definitely makes me smile.
Yeah, you definitely light
Yeah.
up when you
Smiling is just, I don't know. Like I said, it just changes everything, your perspective. And
It does. Over to you, Gabe.
If you had to teach something, what would you teach?
resiliency.
These are softball ones. Your favorite winter activity.
That was easy.
Why don't you give us your favorite type of slope to take a run on?
You know what's so funny? I love my skiing is all about looking pretty when you like pretty style.
A graceful
It's
skier.
great. It's Susie Chaffee, and so I like moderately steep, smooth, so I can show my form.
All right. Hey, that sounds a lot like Gabe's style.
Yeah,
Oh, thank you.
and length, being able to do that right for a long time.
Well, this is an easy one. Pizza or Mexican?
Oh gosh, both.
All right.
No discrimination here.
None.
We're in SoCal. You can't discriminate against either. If you traded places with any one person for a week to take a walk in their shoes, who would it be and why?
Goodness, who would that person be? Yeah, I think it would have to be two people for me. It would have to be someone who has literally no access to anything to see how
To be one of your students?
to be one of my students and to really be, and I mean even our students are in a school, like even layers, but like levels before that.
Yeah.
And then I think on the flip side, I'd trade places with a world champion athlete
All
to
right.
live on the side of what happens when you've worked your body and your mind to that degree.
Oh, well, those are both great ones. Yeah.
Well, wrapping up here, the show's called Discover the Difference. So the last two questions we liked are start with some reflective. If you want to kick off Discover, Gabe.
Yeah. So in the discovery, when you're reflecting back, I mean, on your journey, and you've had an amazing and tough and crazy journey, what would you now, what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self that, sort of going back to choices, that you make your choices, and to stay impassioned, and to be resilient, and to be hopeful, and to be certain that if you have an idea, it can become something.
I love it.
Love that.
So the second question is really about what's the difference that makes Nancy Gale, Jamah, ambition unique, the secret sauce, if you will, out of all the things we discussed today.
Okay, I think the secret sauce would be pushing yourself to find spaces that are untapped. And I think that's why, like right now, we're flying with this motor car collection. Is we've actually found something that's not been done and are doing that. And we found that, I think, with ambition too, is the way we run our program. I remember when we started, everyone kept saying, you're never going to be able to retain mentors. That's the hardest thing in the world. That's literally been the easiest thing. And I think it comes from having faith in people. And I think you have to go through your life doing things that also empower you. Like, and I know, right, for skiing, having sports, I used to be a really avid skydiver. And I think everything, all the choices I make are to remind me that I'm in control, but making sure you don't confuse that with being a control freak.
So empowered.
Yes,
Empowered,
yeah,
yeah.
empowered.
So how do people that are listening to this find ambition and then also Jamah?
So ambition is ambition.org, and you can see all our videos and stories. And Jamah is Jamah, JAMAH.com.
Awesome. All right, Nancy. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We can't wait to help tell your story.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.